based in Copenhagen. She holds a master's degree in modern culture from the University of Copenhagen and is part of Marronage, a collective of intersectional feminists who bring narratives of resistance to life through editorials, articles, and events. In addition, she has been involved in... Oh, shit. Sorry. In addition, she has been involved in various projects initiated by museums and art institutions in Denmark, such as the exhibition This Is Not Africa at ARoS and the recent talk series Becoming at Art Hub Copenhagen. And next to Mai, we have Ro Averin. Ro is an author, consultant, researcher, and educator who centers conscious and intersectional approaches to social, racial, and environmental justice in many areas through her project, the Unlearn Project, and in the arts through the Reykjavík Art Initiative. Born on Turtle Island in Canada, Ro now calls Sápmi in northern Norway her home. Her legacy extends through the diaspora to Jamaica and the African continent. Outside of work, Ro can be found in nature, writing and editing in a variety of mediums, on a yoga mat teaching and exercising or organizing art and wellness retreats such as Hearing Home, the Hearing Home Retreat. And next to Ro, we have Daría Sól Andrews, who's an African-American-Icelandic freelance curator and art critic, currently based in Reykjavík, New York, and California, between the three places. Her curatorial practice focuses on rethinking how and where and in what form the exhibition concept can be manifested. She works as an associate director at Listval Gallery in Reykjavík and as a curator for Soul Studio, which is her home gallery, where she strives to create a place where life and art can merge, to build a space to experience intimacy and stillness with art, yourself, and others. And last but not least, we have Ulrika Flink, who is a curator based here in Stockholm. She received her MA in curating contemporary art from the Royal College of Art in London. She is currently the artistic director of Konsthall C here in Stockholm, and she was the curator of Borås Art Biennale in 2021 and one of the curators of Momentum 9 in 2017. She has also previously been the director of Konstfrämjandet in Stockholm, assistant curator and producer at Tensta Konsthall, and co-founder of the Stockholm-based curatorial collective Parallelogram. So I'd like to say welcome to you all. I'm so happy to be sitting in this panel with you. And I wanted to just start off by maybe, I've just given your brief bios, but I'd like to dig more into what you actually do. How do your practices look like? So if we could just do a round where, Nisia, you can start.
Sure. So I'm going to start talking about my practice, which really begins at my intersections of my race, class, and gender, and also my lived experience. So for me, my taste comes from there. The artists I want to work with all stems from there. And also how and why I work with certain people in the arts field also comes from this as well. I feel that I also, in my practice, highly encourage collaboration. Collaboration is really important for me. Thinking about who we collaborate with, how to make these connections with people, especially when you're working with underrepresented artists. I feel that other underrepresented artists and creators and people working in the field, there's an understanding that, yeah, we can kind of all root together, all collaborate together and ensure that our voices are heard. I think it's also interesting how working in Finland, but then also working in the UK, when you're speaking with Black practitioners in the UK, they have no idea there's Black people in the Nordics.
Wow.
They have, it's not because of, it's when they come to the Nordics, if they come to a big institution, if they come to Finland, if they come to Kiasma, we're not visible. So obviously, the more they come to the art field and when there's the work that they're seeing, if we're not there, how do they know that it also exists? So for me, it's really about kind of collaborating and ensuring that people across the diaspora also understand and work together. These are the main things for me.
Thank you. Mai, would you like to carry on?
Yes, thank you, and thank you so much for the invitation, both for this talk and also as an advisor for the exhibition. It's great to be here. I guess my practice is formed by being a part of a feminist collective Marronage, which is an intersectional, interdisciplinary collective, which was initiated in 2016, where people working within various fields, also challenging colonial and racial structures and gendered structures, came together to try and make a counter-narrative or challenge how we thought that the commemoration of the Danish sale to the US Virgin Island, this Danish sale of the US Virgin Island to the US in 2017 would play out. So it was actually the collective kind of came together around this commemoration, and it has always been a question of trying to show how present and past are not so separated spheres, but also trying to think about, how questions of racialization and colonization is not taking place only elsewhere, but is also playing out in the local political reality right now, and try and point to different aspects of how it plays out within the arts field, in the asylum system, memory politics, the conflict right now in Palestine. It's trying to always keep the politicians accountable, and also the cultural institutions. So I guess my practice is very much formed by that, always trying to have like this holistic view on these different structures and figure out how to challenge them in various ways. Yes.
Ro.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me be a part of this, and as Mai said, be a part of the advisory process for this amazing space that you've created. I'm probably the newest of everyone to the curation sphere, and I'm certainly here thanks to, it's fitting that we're surrounded by Rafiki's art right now, but thanks to Rafiki. And her Rafiki Art Initiatives project that she generously invited me onto, which is certainly focused on many of the things that both of you have already mentioned, creating space in the Nordics for Black and Indigenous and people of color artists, and creating spaces that subvert kind of the institutional art machine. And in doing so, kind of give an answer to just how interconnected everything is interdisciplinarily, but also in terms of structures and systems that we are making art about, and trying to answer back to in some way that are themselves all connected, certainly also connected to the current Palestinian genocide undergoing currently. So I think that's what brings me to how I curate. I'm still discovering how I curate, but it's very much it will always be rooted in those concerns. It will always be rooted in demanding space where there hasn't been, in creating volume where there was silence and silencing, and figuring out ways to also honor and be in connection with the land that we're doing this kind of work on. So keeping in mind indigeneity and how interlinked our struggles are. So, yeah.
Thank you. Daría Sól.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, again, thanks again for the invitation to be part of this project, and great to be here with all of you today. So, like Marcia mentioned, I'm based mostly in Iceland now. I've also been between the States and Iceland, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, when kind of talking about racial issues and representation, it's very, very different landscapes in Iceland for sure. I work currently as the exhibitions manager at Gerðarsafn Museum, the Kópavogur Art Museum, which is a museum in the Reykjavík capital area in Iceland, and work also independently on my own projects. And like Marcia mentioned, some years ago I founded a home-based gallery that I guess at the time kind of functioned as an experimentation kind of phase for me to try things out. I didn't feel like I wanted to wait around for opportunities that I felt weren't going to come to me, and just we're talking about making space, and I guess this was a way to make space for myself and go after those opportunities. And in terms of my kind of curatorial focus, I think when I started this home gallery, like I mentioned, it was kind of an experimentation phase, and I maybe wasn't so comfortable at the time to take that step of saying, I'm going to focus on representation, I'm going to make space for Black and brown voices in Iceland, because the conversation isn't quite there yet in Iceland, I would say. I think in kind of comparison to the other Scandinavian countries, we're quite far behind. And it's only just now that I think people in Iceland are starting to wake up to that, these are things we need to be talking about. And yes, but at the time I didn't quite feel ready to take that step of making space for our important voices. But at a certain point, I just felt there was no other option for me. I have this certain platform and certain opportunity, I guess you could say, in Iceland, as one of the few kind of Black voices in the art field in Iceland. And so for me, it wasn't really a question at a certain point that I felt I needed to take on that responsibility or whatever, you use this voice that I potentially had to try and try and take those steps. So thanks.
Thank you. Ulrika.
Yeah, so, excuse me. Thank you so much, Martha, for letting me into this process. And it's been ongoing for a while. I've also been an advisor, and it's been really interesting and just an amazing result. So thank you so much. So I've been working in Stockholm mainly. I'm still, I did a few years abroad, but I'm back here since the last 10 years. So I've been working in many different sort of positions within the art world, and what I really sort of took from that was that if I ever got a chance to decide something, I wanted it to be different. So I wanted it to be collectively. I wanted us to sort of question how we organize the art world and how institutions are functioning, and how we can maybe find ways of together formulating missions and building institutions that are not by the way it functions, like a neoliberal kind of thinking, muting the art that we actually are exhibiting. So when I got the chance to be an artistic director a few years back at Konstantin, it's actually been 3 years now. It's like, so that ends now in December. But it was really an opportunity for me to think about what it was that I wanted to do. And even though it's like a small venue and small sort of team, there's a lot of freedom. So what I've been working on, I mean, ever since I maybe like graduated, is trying to find ways of bridging different types of struggles, or bridging different types of voices, and how do we, despite all our differences, actually, how do we come together, and how do we collectively work towards a change that would be beneficial for more than myself or my group. So this sort of overlapping different types of struggles been interesting to me, and I've been doing that also outside of the art world. So it's been working with this small organization called Settings, which is a culture producer here in Sweden, here in Stockholm, with Rebecca, and this very much like working with NGOs, working with different type of activist groups, like in the environmental and climate change activist groups and contemporary artists. So this idea of like, how can we reach outside of a very narrow world that contemporary art can feel like sometimes. And another like important part of my practice, I guess, is that I've been working with my colleagues and friends to also try to open up the Swedish art world in a way, or question how it's how it's formulated and how it's run, and what voices are the loudest, and how can we, who have some sort of agency, actually create more room for knowledge that is sometimes forgotten or oppressed, and how do we give back the agency that we also have to other people. So I've been working with my friends with doing books and projects that actually look at the whiteness within the art world of Sweden. So so it's like a traditional, more institutional practice, but also very much focused on working together with others. I would say.
Thank you so much for sharing. And when this project idea came to me, and I started thinking of how to even bring something like this into the world and how to bring it into fruition, I realized that it's not something that one person can do. And so in researching, I've been like, following some of your practices and getting input from different people. And once you start asking one person, you get sent to the next and to the next. And what really drew me about all your practices is that you work in this collective way, and it's about building community. And that's what South Nord really needs to do. And if it's to be successful, is to be for the community, by the community. And we're using our platform to tell our stories in our way. Because sometimes I think a lot of our stories are told for us, and we might not recognize ourselves when we see the end result. And so I've been very grateful for the input that I got. And just for the audience to understand the process, about, say, 2 years ago, there was a lot of, still today, a lot of negative reporting in the paper, newspaper, and the media about black people in general, and gang violence in particular. And I have 2 young men, sons who are in their early 20s, and I started wondering how this landscape of reporting affects their self-image, and how it affects their their lives, really. So that's what kind of triggered me into doing something. And I was at a point where I wasn't really sure, now that they were grown up, whether I would stay in Sweden or whether I would move back to Southern Africa, where I come from. And so, but having this art background, or this background within the arts and culture making, I decided to use those tools to change or to broaden the narrative. And I hope, as you walk around this exhibition that's titled "The Threshold is a Prism," that you see this this breadth and these different nuances of who we are as people. And it's really it's an exhibition about what it is to be a human being in general, but also a human being in particular when you are a human being in minority or a human being in the diaspora. So once we started our discussions, I think one of the things that we talked about was that it has to be long term. We can't do something, a flash in the pan, and then it's gone. That we wanted something that would keep on going and be stronger as time, because there'll be more and more voices coming into it. And the great thing with living in the Nordics is that there are funding systems. So we got a lot of funding, thank goodness. So I'd like to thank all our funders. And so that is an opportunity, but there are also challenges within trying to do something that's artist-driven and curator-driven and grassroots-driven, where you want to insert yourself into existing structures and institutions. I was thinking that maybe you could all speak on the specific challenges and also opportunities, possibilities that are within each of your countries, where like if you're working like you both in the UK and in Finland. But I'm more interested in the Nordic situation. Like what opportunities are there out there for us who want to take these initiatives and find ways of telling our stories, and what challenges can one meet?
I think especially around funding, I think in Finland there's amazing opportunities, but it's also a challenge. There's two different reasons. One is that a lot of people have these great ideas, and then if they don't receive the funding, they tend to then stop or change their idea and then go through another path. Whereas when you're in the UK, there's hardly any funding. So if you want to do your project, you just call people and ring around and find groups and find people to collaborate with. That happens much more in the UK. In the US, it happens even more because there's no funding at all. Curators I know, especially black curators in the US, they have full-time jobs, 9 to 5, and then they do these great projects at the weekends or in their free time. So I think that's fantastic, having these opportunities, having the support. But another challenge is you have to speak a certain way, or when you're writing these applications. What I've found is that if you're not good at communicating in a written text form, then you can really struggle applying for grants. Whereas one positive thing from the UK is when you're writing grant applications, there's usually 3 methods. You can write a text, 5 pages, you can send in a video and do a video application, or you can do a text-based or a voice-based application, and they're all accepted. And I think that's to ensure that people from any economical background, any education, can still have these amazing ideas and put these ideas forward, and there's no kind of initial barrier to being able to write academically. So that's, for me, funding is, an opportunity and a challenge in the Nordics.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I would say more or less the same about funding in Denmark, but I would like to talk a little bit about also like some of the challenges there is in terms of like some of the dynamics in the arts world. I would say I loved when you were talking about your project of your home gallery, and also just the importance of having this space made by us, for us. In Denmark, there aren't any, like the staff at every institution is almost entirely white. So there is this dynamic. I would say that there are a lot of opportunities of being invited. So you would be invited to do a project, which is always, of course, limited within time and space. And then there is the dynamic of, the guest versus the host. So you would be a guest in someone else's house. So, like, the reason why I think this project is especially important is that my experience of being someone who is often invited to do projects at these white institutions is that there would be a lot of translation work because, a lot of the staff aren't actually, haven't done the unlearning process in terms of like challenging their minds, in terms of being socialized into this white colonial society, and also not having the bodily experience to actually kind of register what is going on in like every space in just a meeting situation. So there is like a lot of translation of that experience of like the knowledge you've gained through the years, and that makes it quite difficult to actually do you have to go a lot to actually do the project. So I think that that it is so important with these projects made by us. So of course there's also translation that has to be done in every situation where you have an encounter, but it's just to have like a shortcut to actually get to work. And also, I think we need more spaces like that in Denmark that are actually grounded or has this point of departure as the permanent point of departure, not being a theme of a project, temporary project, but actually being something like an anchor in society that is always working to decolonize, always working to challenge colonial and gendered racializing structures. And also just to have that conversation actually evolving, not because that's also a thing in Denmark is this question about colonial amnesia, which is not only in terms of the past, like, transatlantic slave trade, all of the colonies Denmark had, but also in the present past, which is just what happened in 2020, like what that past, like, just ignoring like all of the testimonies about racialized experience that came due to the like this globalization of Black Lives Matters, and just not have taking that into consideration when, for instance, inviting big black international artists, not being inviting the community to have like talks about like what is going on here in like locally. So it always becomes just like, but is racism always also going on here? It's like, so then we start the conversation all over. So that like that, so there are a lot of reasons to have spaces like this.
Thank you. Bro, what's the situation like in Norway from your point of view? Because you not only work with Reykjavík Art Initiative, your own project, Unlearn Project, is going and trying to challenge these ways of thinking.
All the things that have already been mentioned, for sure. There's an enormous amount of funding available. The accessibility of the funding is a different question, particularly to marginalized communities, racially marginalized communities. I mean, this starts in youth. This starts with youth not seeing themselves fitting into art school forms and spaces, or not feeling that they would be safe in those spaces, which is often very much true, existentially and otherwise. And so it starts there. But I think it extends, I was just recently speaking to somebody up in the far north of Norway who I guess has been making art for many, many, many years, hadn't even heard of the state funding that they could have been applying to for quite some time. So it's the accessibility of the information around not just application processes and figuring out how to fit yourself into academic writing and all of these things, but the existence of the bodies themselves. So that's certainly one piece of it. I think another piece is inconstancy of investment on the part of these predominantly white institutions. I remember during all of the Black Lives Matter anti-police violence protests that happened in 2020, it felt like there was a lot of momentum happening, and it was quite remarkable coming from Turtle Island and being in Norway and seeing all of these bodies in the streets protesting. And then, noticing that a number of different arts institutions released statements in support of Black Lives Matter. And I actually wrote to a number of directors asking them what their plan was to follow up on those statements. And I got a response from one saying that they didn't have time for the next couple months, but they would try to fit me in. Never got back to me. I checked in 6 months later, didn't respond. So very much this kind of desire to be of the moment and ultimately piggybacking on the deep risk that is taken by Black and brown folks in the act of protest and not really following up. So I think that's certainly an issue as well. And that's something that I've encountered both in my work as a consultant with Unlearn projects and in my work with Reykjavík art initiatives, and certainly also in my work with trying to put together an arts and wellness retreat, having applied to numerous grant projects for a project like that, and when I am rejected over and over again and then reach out for feedback, there are these very careful responses around the relevance around this kind of project being exclusionary because it is a retreat that is only for Black folk. One person even called it a racist project. So there's like a deep lack of understanding of the stakes around this kind of work, even from institutions who now and then, in an inconstant way, will allocate funding a little bit here and there for, those othered and other projects.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but otherwise, much the same as what my Anisha had said.
Daria, what's Iceland like now that you've been working there for a bit?
Yeah, I think I resonate a lot with what you were saying, Mai, about how kind of the representation level at institutions. I could maybe start there. It's much the same that kind of at all staff positions at any museums or galleries or funding institutions, anywhere that's making the decisions of who's going to get the opportunities and who will be visible. It's only white people, and I think there is kind of conversation that's been opening up recently, especially around kind of starting when Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. I think Iceland kind of had this like awakening moment of, oh yeah, these issues matter, as if it was the first time that I don't know how else to word that, but so kind of opening up for more opportunities to exhibit for people of color and kind of marginalized voices, but like you were also mentioning, that it's only in the way of kind of inviting you in to, like, as me perhaps as a guest curator, or people of color artists to exhibit, but that's quite a kind of transitory, kind of temporary effect, and nothing quite goes beyond that in terms of like these more powerful decisions of implementing kind of policy changes, or allowing people of color into positions of kind of making the decisions. So at that point, these institutions, they feel, you know, their work has been done. Great, check the box. We got the black curator, you know. And I have felt in recent years, it's kind of a conflicting feeling of like being tokenized, basically, and when these projects come up, anything that has to do with racism or marginalized voices, you know, call Daria. And that, of course, I'm happy to be provided opportunity, and I want to take those positions and give my voice, but it does feel like then at that point the conversation's over, and you know, the work has been done, and that's not really the point, as we all understand. And in terms of kind of funding opportunities, there is great funding in the Nordics and also in Iceland, but like you were mentioning, Ro, in terms of kind of accessibility of that, Iceland is quite xenophobic, and if you know, it's as simple as your name on the application. If you don't have a name like my name, or if you don't have a name that's kind of traditionally Icelandic, you're much less likely to be chosen for those opportunities, unless it's something that's kind of specifically geared for foreigners, or and even if you have a name that's not traditionally Icelandic, doesn't mean that you're a foreigner, but you are still kind of always experienced that way, as being other, as not belonging to there, as not
Ulrika, would you like to fill in a little bit about the Swedish situation? I talked very briefly about it.
Yeah, briefly. But, well, so the funding structures, of course, mirrors the other Nordic countries. And, I mean, in a sense, the last 7 years or so, there's been changes, not in the structures, but in how people and different sort of BIPOC collectives have chosen to organize around themselves. And in that sense, there's been a shift, I think. There's many different voices. So within the art schools, there was these great initiatives by art students, like the Brown Island at Konstfack, and I think it's called Collar Island in Gothenburg, Valand, where students organized themselves to sort of give themselves a space for agency and safety within that white institution, which are the art schools. And that is something that is, you know, perhaps maybe happened in the 80s and 70s that I didn't know about, but from my perspective, that was something new for me. And a lot of interesting, like, guidebooks and things, how to survive art, came out of those initiatives, and also collectives of artists that you could continue working with as a curator. I also been involved in different attempts to sort of talk about the fact that the visual art fields in Sweden is the art sector, so that is least likely to have like a broad representation. So if you look at theater, dance, or orchestra, they're more diverse than the visual art fields. And when I got my job, like as artistic director back in 2020, I think I was the only one at that point. Somebody told me this. I didn't check that myself, but that is just horrendous, right? With so many institutions. So by, you know, like formulating projects that keeps talking about these structures, I think it's so one last year, I initiated a project that were to look at the art fields as a working environment for artists, curators, and producers. And my colleague Macarena Dusant did a really brilliant job of putting together like deep interviews with people who are working within essentially a very white art world. And also a survey of artists that are self-identified as BIPOC, and asking them how the working environment is. And the answers that came back was, of course, there is a lot of discrimination, a white-focused sort of agenda that is sometimes not even thought of, because that's the norm. So it's not problematized because that's how, business as usual kind of thing. But that leads to a lot of burnout, a lot of cultural workers that are doing work for the institution just because they're the only one that are, black or a person of color, that has to do with, let's try to check a box this year. So that type of stress that people have to live with is also very determined. It's very bad for their mental health. So this became a report, and also these really nice animations. Yeah. So one can take in the report in that way. And it was called, let's see, so I say the right, Structural Patterns and the Monster of Whiteness. And it was Amanda Casanella who made the animations. You can Google them if you go to Konstfrämjandet. They're a part of their website. Right. And I think that work was not sort of spread enough, because there's if you do censors and stuff, there's always these rules how many people should ask, how many people should have participated for it to be valid. And the press thought it was not enough people taking part of this. But then you have to think, actually, there's not so many of us in this field. So almost all of us in somehow was involved. So it was actually very broad spectrum, right? So yeah, I think that working with these type of projects, like pushing the boundaries of white institutions, there's this thinking that because you know a lot about like decolonial theory or feminist theory or intersectional theory, you're fine. Like we've done our homework, but if it doesn't translate into action, then it's just theoretical knowledge. So I think like for us who are on the outside, like pushing and asking for accountability is something that, like in a longer run, can slowly change it. So, yeah.
Thank you. I was thinking of maybe, time flies, opening up to the audience, because we only have 8 minutes left of our time. Does anyone in the audience wish to make a comment or ask a question? Yes, Michelle.
I have a question in regards to accountability. How do you take each of these art foundations to accountability for their work? Because I think actually...
Sorry, Michelle. Can you wait for the microphone so we get it, so everyone can hear the question? Sorry.
I don't speak loud enough. Okay. Accountability. How do you take art councils to accountability? How do you create in that position? I know that it's a kind of a fragile position because, of course, you're applying for funds and then you're like questioning where are they putting their priorities or what are they looking towards. I give you an example because I thought this was interesting. A curator came to Denmark, wanted to do a project, a curatorial project, but she was focused on bringing public programming into the project itself. And the space itself, even though it's a very well-funded space, had no idea of public programming really on a larger scale and what it would mean to involve the community. And there is no, I went and looked up, like, are there any programs within the Arts Council that really focuses on bringing in new audiences or new communities in? They don't exist. So I think also we We have to think about strategies of how to create these accountabilities within these systems, because they also have to be taken into account, and they also have to include new ways and new elements. So I think we also have to think about strategies to change these ways of thoughts. And if you have any experiences yourselves with this outcome of coming with a thought and making a change within the system itself. That's my question.
Maybe accountability. I could just start, I mentioned a little bit about the process of working here at Kulturhuset, because when I came with an exhibition idea. It was like, yeah, an exhibition, can I use one of your galleries? And they were like, sure, that sounds like a good idea. And I was like, but also I want to have programming. Also I want to activate the space. Also you have this enormous building with all these functions. How can we access them? And I have to be honest, in the beginning, it was kind of like, oh, we work here and that department's there and that department's there, very silo. But after a while and after like a lot of talking and presenting ideas, people started to see the synergy in actually putting, like using the whole building and using all the resources and all the staff. But it is heavy lifting. I mean, you know, we shouldn't kid ourselves. We do a lot of heavy lifting, us cultural workers who come with our ideas and trying to realize them, that you have to go the extra round. You have to have that stamina to talk to everyone and convince everyone that this will be great, and believe in the vision, and you'll see it when it happens. And now when it's unfolding, I think everyone's really pleased that we made that extra effort and went that extra mile, because literally we are, you know, from the store in the bottom to being in this space, to being in the library, to being, you know, with the kids in the kids section of the building, to being in the cinema. So we've actually managed to do this, and I have to applaud all the staff that has been involved here, because it's not easy for them either, working within a very elephant-like structure that moves quite slowly, you know, when you're trying to make that shift. But I think that we just can't stop doing the work. We can't stop giving up, even though it takes a lot of energy. I don't know what my fellow curators say. We do a lot of heavy lifting when we come, especially when we come in, like you were saying, Mai, as guests into somebody else's house. Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to add to that. Yeah, Daria?
Yeah, I can't say I have like a successful story, perhaps, but just to add, I guess, earlier this year I was invited by one of the main art museums in Reykjavík into a conversation around policy change, that they are looking towards the future, and brought in a range of diverse voices in the hopes of kind of influencing what will the kind of focus of their coming policies be for the future. What do they want to change? What do they want to implement? I use the opportunity to mention representation and BIPOC voices, and, you know, making these kind of policy changes in terms of, you know, just small steps, and, you know, diversity hires, or, you know, the things along those lines. Mm-hmm. And it was met with very rigid feedback, not surprisingly. But the main kind of comment was that, oh, these sorts of things, they take so long, you know. And we can start thinking about it, but, you know, it's such a long process to implement, and it takes so much energy, it takes so much money. And I kind of pushed back on them that that's just not true at all. It's all about, if you make it your priority, it's really quite a simple thing. Just saying, we have to hire 2, you know, BIPOC staff this year. And it's, you know, really, it can be as simple as that, making that first step. And in terms of, I tried to compare it to them to gender equality in Iceland, because they have done fantastic things there, and it happened in a really short amount of time. Because what they did, they just said one year, hey, we need to make this a priority. And they, you know, implemented into their institutions, we have to hire, you know, 10% or whatever the percentage was every year of women. We have to, you know, increase the wage gap, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, it happened. And I just was thinking about this because just this past week, there was an anniversary for the women's kind of wage battle, you could say, in Iceland. And almost 100,000 women left their jobs, unpaid and paid work that day, and protested in Iceland because that wage gap hasn't quite been achieved. But just to put that in comparison, there's 400,000 people that live in Iceland. 100,000 women showed up to protest this. Just imagine if we could have one day for our communities and that we would all leave our jobs and just say, we're not doing it anymore. So it's just a question of priority. Yeah.
And I would like to add to this as well. It's about who is saying the message. For me, what I've found is that sometimes I can say the same thing that, for example, Arts Council England are saying. But if I'm saying that to an institution in Finland, they're not going to listen to me. But I can have the ear of somebody in Arts Council England when they come to Finland, because they constantly collaborate together. If that person says the exact same thing I've just said, somehow everybody's listening. So I think it's also about who is giving the message and about accountability. Yeah.
So, sorry, one last comment, because it's 12 o'clock and I was thinking Ulrika can round off with...
Accountability. Well, one thing that we did, I think 2016, we released this book called some handlingsplan, so an action plan to desegregate the art world. And it was a collaborative thing where there were many artists and curators invited. And we tried to understand together what how can we work with administration, bureaucracy, all of these tools that are actually, the format for funding. And a lot of people were super hyped about, we get an action plan, we just have to follow this now and then, everything is solved. But that wasn't the part of the book. The book was to start thinking about these different questions, right? Like whose voice matters and what are the long-term goals one can set for an institution. And what we did after that is a lot of people bought the book at different institutions, and then we went out to start to lecture and work with different staff groups to see how they could, utilize these action plans. And actually, the action plans was also a word list, so you could demystify things like artistic quality. What does that really mean, and from what perspective? Or things like strategic change. What does that really mean in those types of bureaucracy reports? So I think us coming together as a group and then going out into these different institutions and working with them on a team-to-team basis actually did work. But of course, that's like a heavy lifting and a long-term engagement. So, but I do believe that there's not so many art schools, for instance, in Sweden. So we started with them as well, talking and having workshops. But yeah, hopefully we can give this, over to someone else who want to continue that work, because that's going to be an endless sort of a little bit of a hill or a lot of maybe like a mountain to climb. But we continue to do that and push for those questions, because we are also taxpayers and they are running on tax money. So it should be a program that actually mirrors lived experience, everyone's lived experience in a country. So
thank you. Yeah. Thank you for those closing words. And thank you to everyone for listening. I'd just like to say we have 3 more sessions today. We have an artist talk soon here at 1 o'clock, I think, with Rafiki and T. Michael. We have another one with Sasha Huber and Johanna Sandels Wright at 2 o'clock. And then at 3, just round the corner, and then at 3:30 we'll be back here with the No-Neen editors, who will give us a short lecture and a conversation with Andrea Davis Kronlund. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.